His favorite color?
Naya blinked.
That's right, Say nodded as she leaned forward with quill and paper in hand. What is the Sorcerer King's favorite color? It should be black, right? He has a black robe and summoned black furniture.
No, he wore more colorful things, too.
The gears in Naya's head ground away as she tried to come up with an answer to Say's question.
I don't know. How could she not know? She had been His Majesty's squire for weeks, yet she didn't know what his favorite color was. How was that possible? Across the table, Say frowned slightly. Then, when is the Sorcerer King's birthday? The second question plunged into Naya's heart like a cruelly barbed arrow. I don't know, she said in a small voice. Okay, then what about his wife? His wife? Did the undead know? Surely someone as great as His Majesty the Sorcerer King had a wife. At least one wife. Naya wouldn't be surprised at all if His Majesty had an entire harem of wives. But who? Naya thought back to her time in the Sorceress Kingdom, trying to recall anyone that might qualify as the Sorcerer King's wife. The only person that might have counted, however, was the dark-winged beauty that he had first appeared with. That was impossible, though. She was the Prime Minister and kings didn't marry their Prime Ministers. Since His Majesty was undead, he probably had an amazing and beautiful undead wife. Say's expectant gaze slid away from Naya. Maybe these questions were harder than I thought they were. Why are you asking stuff like this, anyway? Naya said, I thought your questions would be about His Majesty's mighty feats or words of wisdom. That is more exciting and all, but don't you think it's strange? All of the stories about legends and heroes never have the details that I'm asking for. Except when they kidnap the wife or kill her off because the hero needs a reason to go do something. It makes it feel as if the one who originally recounted the tale didn't know the person at all. Naya sagged over her table as another arrow, no, a spear, plunged into her breast. The girl was brutally butchering her with a handful of words. She reached for her dagger and took a slice of cheese as if to beg for a reprieve. I already forgot what I wanted to share with her. It was more that the shock created by the questions had knocked what she wanted to share out of her head. Who knew that someone so young could be so dangerous? How old are you, Say? Naya asked. I've been curious about your age since I first saw you. 11. Hey, she's 4 years younger than me. She seems a lot more mature than that. It's amazing that you're traveling at that age, Naya said. Have you been alone all this time? I had a brother. Say looked down at the table, but a woman came out of the forest and took him away. Oh. I'm sorry. A woman came out of the forest? She wasn't aware of any places where humans were aided by human tribes. She didn't even know that there were human tribes, so Say must have been from very far away. It's all right, Say told her. He didn't even fight back. Boys are awful. Naya wasn't sure how to respond to that. That seemed to be more and more the case these days. Anyway, Naya said, is there something else you'd like to ask? Maybe about the Holy Kingdom or the war? There are a lot of things, but, Gem, how about we start from the beginning? Where did Yaldabaoth come from? We could never figure that out, Naya replied. All we know is that the Abelian Hills was conquered by him before he came to the Holy Kingdom. Before that, he raided the capital of Riastais. No one that we asked about Yaldabaoth in Riastais knew anything about his origins. It was a mystery that left a few people wondering if fiends would suddenly pop up again. The temples had no answers. Most, however, only saw it as a periodic calamity, one that only happened once in several lifetimes like the legends so often told. How about another question? Naya asked. That answer probably wasn't very satisfactory. Thankfully, Say stuck to topics about the war. After 2 hours, she ran out of paper, so they decided to call it a night there. The following morning, they encountered one another again while Naya was organizing supplies for her men. What you doing? Say asked. Making sure my men have supplies for our next shift, Naya answered. Didn't you say you just started? You look like you're used to it. It's the duty of a squire to manage things for their paladins, Naya said. And, during the war, I ended up in command of the regiment of archers. By the end of the war, I think I got pretty good at doing this kind of thing. I was never an excellent warrior like my father or mother, so I'm glad that I have at least some skills that I can be confident in. So you're something like a captain or commander? Sea commander? Naya's eyes went wide. I would never presume to be someone so important. I'd be like a sergeant, at best. But you commanded an archer regiment. Naya laughed nervously as she waved away the notion. We were just desperately short of people. Plus, I think most of the reason why I was put in command of that regiment was to appease His Majesty the Sorcerer King. Huh? You know how it goes, Naya sighed. Everyone is associated with someone. People are in the positions that they're in because of who they know more often than because of their personal capabilities. Connections matter, and you risk angering groups of people because their associates aren't given important jobs. Is that how it works here? Say frowned. Pretty much. Back before the war, you had people that bribed their way into choice assignments away from danger or science who were made officers during their time in the army. My father had a lot of stories about those guys. And I was there for many of them, a voice came from behind. They turned to find Mr. Lauser waving a hand with a smile on his face. Mr. Lauser, Naya said. I'm sorry, I only came because I heard something interesting, Mr. Lauser told her. If anything, you should be commended for ensuring your supplies are sorted out on a day off. And I see that you're keeping our esteemed visitor company. I guess we got to know one another a little bit since yesterday, Naya said. She asked what I was doing and it just went from there. So I heard, Mr. Lauser said. Back when I served in Poville's platoon, he wasn't so renowned but his attitude toward those nobles was unchanged. Sometimes we would play pranks on them. Pranks? Say tilted her head curiously. Pranks, the short man nodded. The regulars in the army never had any respect for the nobles who bought their ranks, but some of them were in particular need of humbling. What did you do? There were many things but, this one was my favorite. About a decade ago, we had a truly obnoxious man placed over us. One day, our squad intercepted a demi-human raiding party. Pavel had us cut off their heads, skin them, and clean everything up before bringing it all back to the wall. Naya leaned forward. She hadn't heard this story before. That same night, we raided the man's quarters wearing those same heads and hides. He screamed and cried as we carried him off, but his unit was too terrified to do anything and they weren't fast enough to catch us besides. We kept going with our little prank until the Holy Order sent a squad to investigate. What happened then? Naya asked. It got weird. The leader of the Paladin squad was your mother, you see, and she found us roasting the nobleman on a spit. What? We weren't really cooking him. It was just a tiny fire, but it was enough to make the man soil himself and plead to the gods for mercy. Your mother took one look at us and charged with her sword held high. She chased us into the nearby bush and we had to hide from her for the next few hours. The next time Pavel went home to see you and your mother, we thought we would never see him again. Demi-humans don't cook their food, you see, so we thought he was cooked for sure. No wonder her father hadn't shared the story with her. It seemed that he had taken that particular secret with him to the grave. That's hilarious, Say grinned. Did anyone get in trouble for that? I don't think so, Mr. Lauser said. The punishment would have been quite severe. But Poville's disdain for people like that nobleman was probably a large part of why he was never promoted to captain. I guess the fact that his eyes made him look like he wanted nothing more than to butcher those men on the spot didn't help. When I see yours, however, I am only reminded of the good times I had in his platoon. She appreciated the man's sentiment, but she knew it wouldn't change the opinion of strangers who saw her. She was just thankful that the ranchers hadn't shunned her over them. Once she completed her task, Naya went over to see her men encamped on the northern side of the hill. Being free until the evening's banquet, Say accompanied her. The camp around the villa looks a lot like the labor camps around the cities, she said. Is that so? Naya glanced at her. You haven't been to them? Naya shook her head. The Holy Order and the Royal Army were already busy enough, so any groups that could police themselves were left alone so limited resources and manpower could go to where they were needed. What are they like? Naya asked. They're interesting, the bard answered. It's like they're little fiefs run by the nobles. That makes sense, Naya said. It's how they're used to doing things, after all. Mr. Lauser isn't a noble, is he? Naya pondered her implication. I guess it's the way that people are familiar with. Everyone served in the army and everyone's used to how nobles run things. Hasn't anyone ever considered doing anything differently?
Say asked. Well, there are the city folk, Naya answered, but they answer to the crown and the guilds. It feels like it ends up being the same. They stopped and waited for a small mob of boys chasing each other with sticks to go by. The camp was essentially a town made up of tents, so Naya wondered if an actual town would appear around the villa at some point. All of the families and businesses that had set up shop probably preferred proper buildings to live and work in. Oh, Baraha, a rancher approached them, scratching his belly with a yawn. You come down for something? Sorry for bothering you on your day off, Naya replied. I just came to see how the men were doing. Well, that's kind of you to do so, the rancher said. The men that aren't sleeping in are mostly honing their rodeo skills. Thanks. How is everything in the camp? Do the people need anything? The man crossed his arms and slowly scanned the tents around them. Can't say we're in need of anything, he said. Well, anything reasonable. But if you just so happen to have a pile of gold to hand out, I don't think anyone would complain. How do you feel about the way this hacienda is being run? Say asked. What do you mean by that, miss? Things now are different from the way they were before, aren't they? They are, the rancher admitted, but I don't think things are bad because of it. The old way wasn't working, so why would anyone stick with it if they had a choice? But that's because of the war, isn't it? Naya said, it basically put us in a giant hole. No one's stupid enough to think that things would just go back to the way they were before, at least not right away. As far as she knew, that was the consensus. The cause for their woes was Yaldabaoth, but Yaldabaoth had been defeated. Everything that the war had taken away wouldn't just magically come back, and, by the same token, there was no point in getting angry over it because the one who had caused it all was gone. They just had to work hard and rebuild for the sake of future generations. If anything, the future looked bright. The war left them with many problems, but the demi-human menace that had plagued them for their entire existence was now out of the picture. The Abelian Hills was under the Sorceress Kingdom now, and the Sorceress Kingdom was friendly with the Holy Kingdom. Everyone understood that the new normal would be much better than the old one where people no longer had to sacrifice their sons and daughters to the wall and live in constant fear of the demi-human raids that could strike even the capital. The cities and towns seem like they're having a hard time, Say noted. Shouldn't there be a limit to how much they have to sacrifice? They're an odd bunch, the rancher said. It used to be that spares and such went to the towns and cities because there was no way for them to survive in the country, but now it's the other way around. At least it should be, but they insist on staying where they are. Makes no sense to me. We even have artisans from the towns and cities working for Mr. Lauser here, so that makes it even more confusing. Foolish, stubborn pride, I say, a woman folding laundry nearby said. The city folk always look down on us. They think we live in mud huts, eat dirt, and fuck our cousins, if not the livestock. Several men and women working around them sighed and shook their heads. Personally, Naya didn't believe that as a city dweller, but she was more than aware of the attitudes of her fellow urbanites. Well, that's their problem, the rancher said. Things aren't so different for us anyway. We're eating about the same as before, and our lives as ranchers aren't very different. If anything, our lives are better now. The only thing we're missing are our houses, and Mr. Lauser's about to do something about that. He is? Yup. Rumors going around that he got permission from the royal court to repurpose all those abandoned villages in his territory. The camp artisans look like they're doing some extra work for something, so it's probably true. Official figures from Hobans claim that the Northern Holy Kingdom had 3.5 million remaining citizens, but Naya was pretty sure that wasn't true. Between the predations of Yaldabaoth's army, the battles of the war, death from starvation, exposure, disease over the winter, and the demonic reign of terror that saw countless people butchered for no good reason, a lot of empty land had been left behind. This, of course, was made most apparent by all of the empty villages dotting the countryside. The sheer number of them suggested that the North had lost at least half of its people. Early post-war measures included consolidating the rural population into functional villages. Those villages, in turn, salvaged materials from the abandoned ones to rebuild. The fact that Mr. Lauser had been granted permission to tear down what was left was basically an admission by the royal court that the North had lost more people than they had estimated. So are the people in the camp moving to the villages, Naya asked, or is something else happening? I'm not sure, the rancher said. A lot of the womenfolk have grown to appreciate the conveniences of the camp, though. Some people figure it'd be best to build posts along the grazing routes. Doing things that way would keep more land free for the herds, too. So, ranching forts?
Ranching towns,
Maybe.
they'll be all about our business and what supports it. We can import things we don't produce from elsewhere. That sounds like a good idea, Say said.
You can just focus on becoming stronger and better at what you're good at.
I don't know about that,
the rancher replied,
but it'll be nice to have a community where everyone knows what we're all about. Before, we were just all over the place on whatever land we had. Disputes and other problems with farming types were common. They parted ways with the rancher, heading to the rodeo grounds where most of her men were practicing. Along the way, Naya's thoughts wandered as she watched the people go about their daily tasks. Stronger and better. The bard's statement struck a chord within Naya. She was from somewhere outside of the Holy Kingdom, so maybe she didn't see things the way that Naya's people did. Do you think they can become stronger by doing that? Naya asked. Doing what? By sticking together as a community of ranchers, Naya said. It depends on what you mean by stronger, Say said. What Mr. Lauser has here does have a certain sort of strength, the same kind of strength that craft guilds have. They represent the goods and labor that they have control over, and that control is power when it comes to negotiating with other parties. It's not easy to bully them like one might be able to bully an individual. Was that the strength that the Sorcerer King's wisdom promoted? She didn't think so. It wasn't as if the guilds could do anything to stand against Yaldabaoth. What about other kinds of strength? Like the strength to fight against physical threats like raiders? No. No? Naya frowned at the bard's immediate response. Just doing what they're doing won't make them stronger, Say said. I mean, it won't make them stronger than they are right now. They can do the same thing for their entire lives and it won't change anything. They stopped at the edge of the rodeo grounds, watching the ranchers practice their skills. To Naya, at least, it seemed like their practice would help them become better. Why do you say that? Naya asked. Because it's the truth? Say answered with a frown. There are over 20 million humans from the Holy Kingdom to the Empire, and nearly all of them are like this. They do what they do for their entire lives, but a farmer reaching the end of his life isn't much stronger than a farmer helping out their family as a kid. That's true, but that would mean most people are born weak and will die weak. That there's no way to become stronger. It meant all those people who believed that being strong was something for geniuses and renowned bloodlines were right. That the temple's teachings about freedom of choice were wrong. Well, one could still choose, but the choice was basically between something they were good at and something they had no talent in. Just like me. She had inherited her father's strengths, yet she had insisted on becoming a paladin. At the end of all her years of squiring, she was still far better with the bow than she was with the sword with only a fraction of the effort. Naya shook her head free of depressing thoughts. No, the Sorcerer King's wisdom can't be wrong. Then, is there any way for normal people to become stronger? Naya asked. Sure, Say answered. Really? But I said that what they're doing right now won't make them any stronger, Say told her. It doesn't mean that they can't get stronger. Oh. Would you happen to know of a way how? You could import aurochs, Say said. They're a lot harder to herd. You'd have to get good fast, though. Aurochs are magical beasts and just one of them can flatten a village. I think some of them breathe fire. That sounded like a catastrophe, but it also meant that there were people strong enough to herd fire-breathing magical beasts that could flatten villages. What about something less extreme? Naya asked. We can't afford a bunch of burning, flattened villages right now. Just challenge yourselves, I guess, Say answered. Do ranching things that you'd normally consider hard. That sounds reckless, Naya said. People would normally tell you not to push yourself. Yeah, and people are normally weak, Say looked up at her. You're a lot stronger than these ranchers. Did you get that strong by doing normal things and taking it easy? No, but I had to fight in a war and go through all sorts of craziness. I wouldn't want anyone to go through the same experience. There were other problems with using herself as an example. Foremost among them was the fact that her parents were both very strong. People would just assume she was strong because her parents were strong, and that it was easy to preach strength when one was strong themselves. Say seems to know a lot, So you'd figure she'd know that, too. Wait a minute. Naya resisted the urge to rub her eyes as she looked at the bard.
Say. You're strong.
Not really.
Yes, really. The only people stronger than you in this camp are Mr. Lauser and me.
Yeah, and that's not really strong. But it's stronger than most people in the Holy Kingdom, Naya said.
And all those people served in the army.
What did you do to get that strong?
Did you fight in a war, too?
Naya imagined Say on a savage battlefront. She'd have to be younger than she was, too. A 9-year-old slaying demi-humans 5 times her size with her loot. I traveled and learned stuff and trained, Say said.
Why do you think travelers are always stronger than usual?
What's a traveler?
You know, like warriors that go on journeys to improve themselves?
Or artisans that visit other countries to learn from famous grandmasters. Or bards like me that collect stories from around the world.
You don't have to be a traveler to get strong, though. Travelers just happen to broaden their horizons and grow with their experiences. People can do that without going anywhere at all so long as they have the means to.
I see.
She watched as her men practiced lassoing posts and riding in makeshift corralling formations. Some rode up to targets and planted their arrows and bolts into them while others raced their mounts through obstacle courses.
If this is normal, then what is challenging? Will it really make them stronger? All she needed was to have a few of them show a little bit of improvement. She knew from her time as a squire that most men would grow competitive between themselves so long as their goal wasn't deemed impossible to achieve. The problem was the stakes. During the war, they were clear. After the war, priorities shifted and so did what mattered to her people. No, since this is kind of like a game, then I could just challenge the men through it. The means are already within my grasp. She didn't have to provide for anyone, so she could probably come up with some sort of prize with her allotted portion as a captain. Once they displayed measurable gains, she could show Mr. Lauser, who was already worried about security. He would be more than happy to invest in his people's strength. Just speaking of the Sorcerer King's wisdom and greatness wasn't enough. Not in their current situation. In fact, carrying on as she had was surely a disservice to His Majesty. She had to produce results that were relevant to people no matter the situation they found themselves in. Weakness is a sin, so one must become strong or humbly accept justice similar to that of His Majesty. Back during the war, it had taken Naya a long while to come up with the right words to share with those around her. They were words for a different time, however, and were no longer so easily digested by those who heard them. His Majesty is justice. His Majesty is. Saying things like His Majesty is justice didn't make much sense to those who had never directly witnessed His Majesty's greatness. If anything, it only drew strange looks, so she needed a way to convey the Sorcerer King's wisdom to those who had not felt his justice. Similarly, warning of the sin that was weakness had next to no effect when that weakness was considered normal. At the same time, cultivating strength was time-consuming in a situation where no one had any time to spare. The people were already devoting all of the strength that they had to the recovery of the Holy Kingdom. I guess sin wouldn't be such a big deal if it was easy to avoid. So many things dragged one back into a life of sin, even if they wanted nothing more than to climb out of it. Baraha. Naya looked up from her thoughts. A pair of ranchers was riding in from the south. What is it? Naya asked. We've got 24 trespassers coming up the nearest road. Men, women, and children. Where did they come from? One of the towns near the capital. They claim that they left to look for work. Take me to them. As they galloped off toward the southern fringes of the herd, Say's voice came from behind her. What are you going to do? She asked. The bard was curious about her work, so she had asked to tag along. Naya couldn't think of any reason to refuse, plus it gave her more time to share the Sorcerer King's greatness with her. It sounds like they're families that uprooted themselves to find a way to survive, Naya answered. Mr. Lauser's instructions were to invite people like that to join us. Is that a good idea? I thought people were struggling to get by everywhere. It does feel like that when you're in the cities and towns, Naya said, but the rural areas are doing all right. It's like Mr. Lauser said the other day, they have nearly everything that they need out in the country. As long as we have food, shelter, and fuel, everything else will follow. Fruit season's already started and that runs until autumn. I think we'll start seeing figs next.
Before that, the grain harvest would be in, so it really did feel as if the urban areas of the country were the only places having problems. After the end of the war, the cities made up less than 4% of the Northern Holy Kingdom's population, so it was safe to say that the vast majority of the country didn't feel the same way as they did. But land could take a while to raise, right?
Say said, the cattle they're ranching right now won't be ready for another year.
Everyone knows how the cattle industry works, Nia replied, so I think they'll be all right. Ranchers having debt is normal, and Mr. Lauser says that everyone working under one hacienda actually cuts down on costs compared to all the small, independent operations they used to have before. As angry as she was at the Holy King, Nia couldn't dispute the fact that his mandates had fostered ways of thinking that brought great benefits to the Holy Kingdom, especially in its rural regions, where common tenants once only saw what they kept and what was taken away through taxes and other agreements. They now saw a piece of a much bigger picture where everyone contributed to the total economic strength of their communities. It was a value that had always existed, yet lay obscured by ignorance the entire time. More than a few people felt guilty over their attitudes concerning the nobility now that they understood a bit about how they saw things when running their fiefs. Overall, the developments helped give rise to people like Mr. Lauser, contributing to the appearance of huge plantations in the east and ranches in the west. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the road where the reported trespassers were being held up by her men. 6 families, they don't look like they're in bad shape. I can't tell what they are. They all looked a bit terrified, though Nia supposed that armed men on horseback did have that effect on people. She dismounted and pulled a quill and clipboard out of her saddlebags before walking up to address them. I'm Nia Baraha? Nia blinked as a man cut her off and came forward. Do I know you? Of course. The man brightened, then frowned. Well, maybe not. There were so many of us, so it would be strange if you could remember everyone. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a piece of plain-looking metalwork. Nia's mouth fell open as she pointed at the object in recognition. You're a member of the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps? Yes, exactly. The man beamed. We've all gone our separate ways since then, but I still see a few here and there from time to time. Even after the war, everyone's been working hard to apply the Sorcerer King's wisdom to our daily lives so that people may know of His Majesty's truth. Oh, I'd love to hear all about that. Honestly, I'm having trouble figuring out the same thing. I don't know all that much about artisans or farming or any of that. You've helped us all so much that I'm sure everyone would be more than happy to return the favor. Are you two all right? Say asked. Nia wiped the broad grin off of her face when she realized that she was terrifying everyone else. She cleared her throat and raised her clipboard. It was best to get the people in front of her situated first. She wouldn't be able to talk to the man properly until she got back from her shift. My men said that you left town looking for work, she said. Is that right? Yes, that's right, the man nodded. I didn't know you were here, but we heard that a hacienda's being built and they need people. You're not wrong, Nia replied, but why are you leaving town? Don't you have a workshop or at least a place in one there? The man glanced over his shoulder to the families behind him. His elation from before was all but gone. Things are getting difficult, he said. Dangerous, even. We knew that times would be hard after the war, but the picture looks more bleak every week. Bleak? Nia frowned, even with the harvest starting to come in? Oh, we're thankful for that. But, at the same time, it's just another facet of the problems cropping up. We're losing more and more control over our lives. The nobles from the south that came to help are taking over everything. Her mind went back to the line of angry vendors in Hobans. Do you mean they're stealing your business or something like that? Exactly. I'm a tailor by trade and I can barely get my hands on any materials. Instead, merchants working for the nobles import finished goods from elsewhere. At the rate we were going, we wouldn't be able to make a living anymore, so we left. But why would they do that? Beats the hell out of me. They don't bother answering, either. Everyone in the town is at their mercy and no one dares to raise their voice for fear of being cut off. She thought about the line of merchants in Hobans again. Would the same thing happen to them? It was good in the sense that the rural areas always needed skilled artisans, but the circumstances driving people out of the cities were far from ideal. I see, Nia said. Well, Mr. Lauser is more than happy to welcome excellent artisans. Let's see, You said you were a tailor, may I have your name?
Carlos.
Carlos Sartre.
Carlos.
Naya carefully penned the name of the man and his family members on a slip of paper. There were probably 100 Carloses working for Mr. Lauser. After recording the entire party's information, Naya handed them a letter to Mr. Lauser and directed them to the hacienda, which could be seen atop the hill northwest of them.
I hope that doesn't spell trouble,
Say said as they watched the families depart.
What do you mean?
Naya asked.
They were running from something bad, the bard shrugged.
Something that no one could fight. Do you think it'll just stop where it is? Whoever is responsible for what's happening has no justification to intrude on Mr. Lauser's land, Naya said. Each person that volunteered to help administer the North was assigned a specific jurisdiction. It's not as if they can go wherever they please and do what they want. Though she said so, a sense of wariness lingered over her as they continued south. The next stretch of pasture came within 2 kilometers of the town and Naya told her men to be on their guard just in case someone was up to no good nearby. Naya set up her camp at the boundary between the town and Mr. Lauser's land, where she stared at the walls as they were painted orange by the sunset. Wanna talk? Say came up to her with 2 bowls of stew. Huh?
Oh,
sure.
What about?
What's bothering you, obviously. Naya tapped the bow stave lying across her knees. The security of Mr. Lauser's land was only one of several things that were bothering her. She wondered which one of her concerns the bard was referring to. That tailor and his family, Naya said. They were something like my followers back during the war. As he said, we all went home after that, but we pledged to follow the Sorcerer King's wisdom and spread the truth of His Majesty. I'm sure they all did. Yet, it doesn't seem like it helped him. He had to leave his home in the end. I'm still not sure if I understand this Sorcerer King's wisdom stuff correctly, Say said, placing Naya's bowl on the ground beside her. Did the Sorcerer King teach it to you himself? His Majesty didn't tell me those things directly, Naya said. It's more that I realized the truths that His Majesty represented while serving as His Majesty's squire. Say's expression didn't change in the slightest. Naya sighed inwardly. If only she had seen the greatness of the Sorcerer King in person, witnessed His Majesty's mighty feats. Resistance to her message wasn't new, but the people she spoke with in the past eventually came to realize that her words were self-evident truths. The Sorcerer King is justice, Naya intoned. Weakness is a sin. Do you understand? Not really. What was so hard to understand? It should have been obvious. Naya picked up her bowl of stew, blowing on it to cool it down. If you only saw the Sorcerer King. I have. Naya looked up from her bowl. You have? Of course, the bard replied. I spent a long time in Iranthal. The Sorcerer King regularly walks around the city, so I've seen him a bunch. I'm so jealous. The people of Iranthal were so lucky. How could Say remain unmoved after witnessing the greatness of His Majesty the Sorcerer King? Maybe she was religious. What does the Sorcerer King is justice even mean? Say asked, does that mean he's literally justice? That everything he does is justice? Do I also become justice by walking around Iranthal like he does? Naya's first impulse was to say of course not, but she paused to reconsider such a flat denial. Maybe not literally, she said carefully, but, metaphorically, that may not be wrong. His Majesty's wisdom serves as a path for us to follow. By taking steps along that path, one may achieve justice that is similar to His Majesty's. So since you say weakness is a sin, the justice you speak of is strength? The Sorcerer King is justice because he's strong? No. Naya wagged her spoon in front of her. If strength was justice, then Yaldabaoth, who was strong, would also be justice. Strength is important because justice without power is meaningless. Being strong and exercising one's strength to aid others is true justice. That is why the Sorcerer King is the incarnation of justice. Naya nodded to herself, then scooped a spoonful of stew into her mouth. That was right. The core of it all, the truth that she had come to realize from being His Majesty's squire. Does that mean the demi-humans who used to raid the Holy Kingdom are also justice? Say asked. Huh? Naya pulled the spoon out of her mouth. How? A tribe has champions and hunters who hone their craft and get stronger in order to protect their loved ones and communities. When they hunt, they do so to provide for themselves, their families, and everyone that depends on them. They are the strong who use their strength to aid others. By your logic, they are justice. That means both the demi-humans who raided the Holy Kingdom for food and the Holy Kingdom's strong defenders are justice. Since she put it that way, maybe I need to rework it a bit. But, within the context of the war, her message made sense. They were the victims and Jaldabaoth was an unjustified aggressor. But they had also found that many of the demi-humans in Jaldabaoth's army had been forced to fight against their will. Now, her words could be misinterpreted as a call for humanity to become like the monsters and demi-human tribes that preyed upon them, to join some savage consensus with the rest of the world. Also, Say added, if I've heard it correctly, most of the people who served in the army defending the Great Wall were weak. Does that mean they were unjust? Should they have never gone in the first place? Some people can never be as strong as others. Does that make them unforgivable sinners? In addition to stubbornly refusing to accept the Sorcerer King's greatness and wisdom, Say was very good at poking holes into Naya's statements. On the other hand, it was a good way to review what she would share with others. It's not that there. Naya's voice trailed off as something odd about the nearby town caught her eye. Say waited intently for her to continue, then turned to follow the line of her gaze. What's wrong? She asked. That town doesn't have any magical lighting, Naya answered absently. Don't you think it looks a bit too bright? It was hard to tell in the twilight, but it felt that way. The rooftops still caught the last rays of the sun, but she was sure that something else was illuminating the walls of the buildings. This was strange, considering that fuel had long been subjected to rationing in the north. Is it a fire? Say asked. I don't think so. Naya narrowed her eyes. It's too widespread without much smoke. Maybe they're having a celebration like the one back at the villa. As the evening gave way to night, the odd lighting of the town grew more evident. An unsettling feeling fell over Naya and she looked over her shoulder to the men in her camp. Something's going on in the town, she called out to them. Get the guys on this side together. A low murmur drifted from the town as they waited, but she couldn't make out any single voice. Over time, shouts punctuated the noise. She didn't hear any laughter. Things are getting difficult. Dangerous, even. What's going on out there? One of her men asked. I don't know, Naya replied, but it's been going on since sundown. We check in on 'em? We should, Naya nodded. Just in case. She went to untether her mount, the unsettling feeling growing into one of genuine worry. Her worry turned into alarm as they drew close and a column of smoke rose from the center of the town. A bonfire? No, it's too big. She and her men urged their mounts into a gallop. The voices from the town resolved into sharp and harsh tones as flames licked the black smoke rising into the darkness. I hope we can get that fire under control. The people can't afford this. Naya and 30 of her company rode through the unmanned northern gate. The sentries had probably gone to help with the fire. She slowed her mount upon spotting a crowd in the town square. Then, she stopped and stared, uncomprehending, at the scene that greeted her. A workshop on one side of the square was on fire and there were people everywhere, but no one was moving to fight the blaze. Instead, they stood facing the fire with torches and fists raised. The harsh voices from before weren't men issuing instructions, but voices raised in anger, hurling curses and condemnation at some unseen nemesis. What the? Naya turned to address a nearby sentry. What's going on here? Why isn't anyone putting out the fire? The sentry spared her half a glance before his gaze returned to the crowd. Some greedy fool's getting what he deserves, he told her. What? That doesn't make any sense. The owner of that shop thought he could sell bread at a higher price than anyone else. Serves him right, yeah? Setting someone's shop on fire for unfair prices? There was no law that mandated such a punishment. This is wrong, Naya said. You and the rest of the town guard have to stop this. Do we? Of course you do. This isn't the law. It isn't just. That so? How about we let the people be the judge of what's just? A great cheer rose as the roof of the bakery collapsed. Naya scanned the crowd, aghast at their jubilant expressions. The atmosphere was inhuman. Demonic. Serves you right. Burn, you greedy bastard. Naya leapt off of her horse and shoved her way through the crowd. They weren't actually burning someone, were they? A few minutes later, she emerged in front of the crowd, stepping out before the burning bakery. A lone man in an apron and a baker's hat wept on the cobblestones of the square. Pieces of garbage bounced off of his back and shoulders, adding to the growing pile of refuse around him. Naya's horror grew as she took in the man's features.
I know him.
She saw him every time she came through the town, though she never spoke with him since she could only stop long enough to see if any work-related matters required her attention. During the war, he was a part of the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps and she saw him all the time, distributing provisions every single day with a smile and a word of encouragement for the downtrodden.
Stop this madness.
Naya's voice was drowned out by the anger of the townsfolk. Not even the closest seemed to pay her any heed. She scrambled over to the baker, placing a hand on his soiled shoulders as she knelt beside him. Mr. Juarez. She raised her voice over the shouts of the crowd and the roar of the flames, calling out the baker's name again. He looked up at her with a lifeless expression.
We can't stay here.
She hauled him to his feet, ducking under his arm to help him walk away. Her stomach turned as renewed cheers encouraged her to cast the baker into the flames. Then, the cheers turned into jeers when they saw she was trying to leave with him. Naya looked for an escape route as bits of garbage started to pelt her as well, and then she noticed the ranchers that had followed her.
Clear a path,
she called out. The townsfolk nearby tried to bar their path, but their efforts were disorganized and sporadic. Paving stones joined the bits of garbage cast at them as they pushed and shoved their way back to their horses. Say turned to her when they finally broke out of the crowd.
He can use my horse, she told her.
But
I'll catch up, Say said.
I hope you don't think that a bard wouldn't be interested in learning about what happened here.
There wasn't any time to argue.
Naya helped the man up into Say's saddle and they made their way back out of the town's northern gate.
What in the world was that?
Her mind flashed through the scenes from the town as they galloped into the night.
What in the world was that?
She had never seen humans behave that way before. They were like a mob of savage demi-humans during the war. Mr. Juarez nearly fell out of his saddle upon their return to Naya's camp. She helped him to the fire pit and went to retrieve a spare water flask.
Miss Baraja, one of the ranchers said,
what do we do? Is there any safe way to drive the herd at night? She asked.
No, the rancher shook his head.
Driving our animals too hard will make them lose weight, besides.
Then return to your camps and keep an eye out for anyone from the town, Naya told him.
We'll be grazing here for another day or so take shifts on the watch. Once I figure out what's going on here, we'll know whether it's safe to stay or not. She went to join Mr. Juarez at the campfire, silently staring across the flames at the despondent man. I refuse to believe he's been raising prices like that. It goes against the justice that His Majesty the Sorcerer King taught us, what I taught them. They were supposed to use their strength to aid others. In fact, she had never heard of any of those who had embraced the Sorcerer King's wisdom doing anything even remotely similar to what the baker had been accused of, even in the dark days of the war. Mr. Juarez, she asked tentatively, is what they say true?
How could it be?
The baker didn't look up from the fire. We all saw the truth of His Majesty's wisdom. I did everything that I could to strengthen my craft and my business. I did what I could to bring His Majesty's truth to others. Your patrol route goes through that town, Miss Baraja. You must have seen what I was doing. She had no cause to thoroughly investigate the man while she was working for the Holy Order, so she couldn't say either way.
Then what happened? Naya asked. How could that happen?
I don't know, Mr. Juarez replied. All I know is that business was slow in the morning but picked up later in the day. I thought it was strange, but I never thought that the entire town would turn on me like that. Could it be that you set the wrong price? A few people asked me that, but there was nothing wrong with the price of my bread. It's barely enough for my business to get by on every day. Then nothing makes sense. Not that anything about the incident made sense. People turning on a baker for selling bread at cost. The town guard just letting them burn down what was not only someone's home and business, but also a crucial town industry. The fact that such a horrific idea had even crossed their minds in the first place. She couldn't explain it at all. The Holy Kingdom's people just weren't like that. I'm back, Naya started when Say's voice came from beside her 2 hours later. She hadn't even noticed the bard's approach, though it was admittedly close to midnight. Did you find out anything? Naya asked. I did. Say sat down beside her, but I have a question to ask him first. The bard gestured at Mr. Juarez, who was still raw-eyed from his ordeals. What is it? The baker said. Have the people overseeing your town asked you to do anything recently? Say asked.
Well, it doesn't have to be recently, just something that they wanted you to do. Mr. Juarez's gaze turned inward for a moment. The mill, he said. They offered to buy the town mill from me. It didn't make any business sense, so I refused. They told me it'd be fairer if they controlled the mill, but it's not as if I was edging out the competition running the thing. I've just been charging the cost of the animal feed. My bakery couldn't feed the whole town even if I wanted to.
I see. Then that's probably why the entire town attacked you. Both Naya and Mr. Juarez looked at Say with confused frowns.
I don't get it, Naya said.
You don't? Say frowned back. It's like I said about those people from earlier today. They're running from something bad that they can't fight. The nobles overseeing the town drove the tailor out by limiting supplies of materials and importing finished goods from somewhere else. They can't do the same thing with the bakeries since they serve fresh bread to the town, but they can get their hands on the mill to control the distribution of flour.
But why? Control, Say shrugged.
That's what the other group said, right?
The nobles are taking over everything. I figured the people who lived here would know more about the details than me. How much more control could they possibly want?
Mr. Juarez said, pretty much everyone in town is in debt to them already. Now they want to control our supply of everything?
I still don't understand how anything like that could lead to his workshop being burnt down, Naya said. It's pretty simple, Say replied. I asked the other bakers in the town and they all said that you were overpricing the bread. That's a lie. I've done everything possible to follow the Sorcerer King's justice.
Say danced back as Mr. Juarez lunged at her. Naya stared in shock as the ranchers nearby jumped up to restrain him. The bard coolly gazed down upon the baker with her ice blue eyes.
It's not a lie, she told him. You are all just unaware of the truth. The other 3 bakers were purposely sold grain at a cheaper price and, like you, they charged what they thought was a fair price for their bread. Then, agents of the nobles probably incited the people. The men they assigned to maintain order in the town looked the other way. In the end, the nobles got what they wanted. They got rid of an obstacle, you, while also using you as an outlet for the town's mounting frustrations over everything. Now, they can import flour from a facility that they own, expanding their control over a mollified town and its surrounding villages. As a bonus, all of the other workshops will feel that they need the nobles even more for protection. Mr. Juarez's expression was no less appalled than Naya's own. But that's wrong, he cried. It's evil. Unjust. No, Naya sighed. It might be twisted, but it's not illegal. As for what is, they used a mob to do their dirty work and the Holy Kingdom can't punish an entire population. Not that they have the means to. Yup, Say shrugged. That's just how those types of nobles operate everywhere. Justice is always on their side. Mr. Juarez's shoulders slumped. Naya's men released him. So we can't do anything about it? The baker asked. No, we can. Naya's eyes went to the town on the horizon. If this is how it's going to be, then we must. We'll replace this rotten justice with justice of our own.